Welcome to Photoshop. Now, Photoshop is a little bit different, or I should say, a lot different than Illustrator. Illustrator is a vector program, which means that it was drawing based on mathematical computations. Photoshop is a pixel-based program, which means that at the very heart of it, if you zoom in, everything is composed of little squares, which we call pixels. And in order to do anything, you need to change a pixel. And you can change a pixel's color. That's the sum Photoshop gets. What you have to realize in Photoshop is that you have to select pixels, and then those pixels you then manipulate. So let's take a look at Photoshop's tools. As you can see, here are your tool palettes. Now, just briefly take a minute and notice that the top parts should look completely different, and they are grouped according to what they do. So the top parts all have to do with selecting pixels. The middle have to do with manipulating the pixels. The third has to do with actually drawing like you would in Illustrator with the vector, and they should all look familiar. And the last have to do with measuring, zooming in, attributes of what you will need to do. At the bottom, you'll see some color, and then manipulating your screen. At the top, you have your options, which of course change with the tools. You have your palettes. Palettes are very important in Photoshop. All right, so let's start at the very beginning. How do you move an object? Right? Just moving an object around. Well, you have to have a tool for that in Photoshop. Now, we're going to locate the Move tool, which is shortcut V. But to access this layer, and everything are in layers, as you can see, we'll need to right-click and then go to Move. Our next thing is the marquee. Your rectangle, ellipse, single row, and single column. So let's go to our marquee, right-click, marquee. Marquee. Next is our magic wand, which is used for selecting actual pixels. So the marquee and the magic wand both allow you to select pixels, they just do it in different ways. Our brush. We use the brush a lot in Photoshop, and for our first project we'll be using the brush quite a bit. Now, as I said before, all of these should look familiar in our third section because they're all related to Illustrator. Just like Illustrator, we have the pen tool, and notice the shortcut is P. Notice the shortcut in brush is B. Magic wand is W. Marquee is M. And move, you just have to remember as V. All right, now color is a little bit different in Photoshop. You have a foreground color and a background color. So your foreground color is what if you're painting, and then you can switch to a background color. This allows you to have two colors open in the palette that you would like. There is no frame colors like we learned in Illustrator. It's just foreground and background. So I'm going to take my foreground and my background. Now, layers are very important, as you can see here. You can turn on and off your layers. You can notice that I can turn on and off my layers. So we want to go to our layers, and we use layers extensively here. So we call that layers. Options are the top part, which we were talking about. History, to go back and see what you did at the beginning. You go through your history, and notice that it records what you did. So if you make a mistake, you have to go back to your history. Okay, so let's practice a little bit of selection so that we can understand how to select an object. But before we do that, we need to make one little correction. So right click on Shift Control A, and we need to make a change. So let's go to our text tool, just highlight the A and make it an I. Shift Control. Okay, there we go. All right, so a little bit about Photoshop. You have to select a layer before anything can transpire. So let's go ahead and click on layer 9. With the eye, turn it off, turn it on, making sure that we have the milk selected. Now, there are a couple of ways of selecting. Uh, since I know that this layer only contains the milk, I can go Control A to select, and now I can move the milk. Now, notice the selection are the little ants that seem to be running around the image. That means it's selected, those pixels are selected, and I can move this around. When I'm done selecting, I need to go Control D for deselect. Now, another way of selecting, let's go over to our magic wand and let's click on the background. Now, right now, I haven't selected the actual pixels that contain the milk. I've selected the nothing pixels around the milk. So to get to the milk, I need to go Shift Control I, which is invert. And notice now the ants are running around just the milk. And of course, deselect Control D. So Control A will select all, Control D for deselect, and Control Shift I for select inverse. Because sometimes it's easier to select not the object, but the pixels around an object, and sometimes it's easier to select the pixels of the object. So that's why we need to know the select all and the inverse, Shift Control I, and then when we're done with either of them, we always need a deselect, which is Control